which is called Digital Agora. And I'm giving now the floor to the leading and coordinating organization, CACC, and Marina will be talking on behalf of Paula and herself.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining here live and also online. Our project, Adaptation AGORA, is about citizen empowerment and engagement, co-designing solutions and plans for adaptation in different cities. We've also analyzed policies, we've analyzed the methodologies for engagement. And so we will do a quick look at our project here, for instance, first. So if we start here with the overall aspect of our project, we know that there are four main areas. We have the mapping of the citizen engagement initiatives. We have the pilot regions in Spain, in Italy, in Sweden, and Germany. We've also had the creation of different ICT tools that we will be presenting later on. And also, of course, policy evaluation, which is crucial to be able to deliver the results of our project and to see how we can improve in the future. Citizen engagement and climate action, of course, is very important. And here we know that the public participation is key to be able to get that engagement that we need. And that's why we decided to conduct these four pilots. We're going to see the results from the different pilots, and we're going to start with the Spanish, which was the first one, with our colleagues from ICTs who are connecting online right now.
Dear colleagues from ICTs, please, the floor is yours.
Hello. So I'm not sure if I'm seeing the presentation well.
Which slide? You can look this one. Look at the screen.
The slide is 5, number 5, government place for co-design. Is it good?
Next one. Yeah, thank you. This one. Thank you. So good afternoon. My name is Judith Bielsa, and along with my colleague Lucia Moreno, who will present some insight afterwards, we are researchers at the Ibercibis Foundation and responsible for the Aragon pilot activities that I will now explain. Regarding why adaptation matters in the Aragon region, Aragon, located in the northeastern Spain, faces a semi-arid climate with growing water stress and climate risks like desertification and wildfires. Adaptation here is vital and must be built on local knowledge and community involvement. Next slide, please. First, and regarding the initial engagement, the process started with 2 diagnostic workshops. The first in Zaragoza in 2023 brought together a wide range of stakeholders to identify key climate impacts. Discussions focused on public health, desertification, water scarcity, and support for vulnerable groups. And the second workshop, held in Valderobles, also in 2023, focused on sustainable forest management due to the rural context. Next slide, please. And next, let's take a look at the deepening engagement. Carrying out focus group allowed us to gather diverse perspectives. First of all, the youth one highlighted the urban-rural divide and the need for climate education. The workers one discussed the importance of heat-resilient work environments. And finally, the multicultural communities emphasized reforestation and environmental education for inclusion. The target audience and methodology of these 3 focus groups was common in all 4 pilot regions, as you will see next. And sorry, the previous one, I haven't finished yet. Thank you. And in June 2024, a focus group with elderly women in rural areas highlighted the need for home adaptations and flexible schedules to cope with the heat, the importance of modernizing infrastructure and maintaining local rivers, and the adapting of agricultural practices to the changing climates. Next one, please. And finally, in Zaragoza 2025, a focus group with people with cerebral palsy, we discussed the need for urban adaptations like shaded bus stops or accessible pathways, and the importance of inclusive environments and better coordination between administrations. Thank you. Completing the co-creation process, in February 2025, Zaragoza held the final workshop. 31 participants refined soft adaptation strategies in Zaragoza. 2 priorities emerged. The first was emission reduction, and then climate education and critical thinking. Complementary proposals included community networks, urban-rural reconnection, and renewable energy justice. A shared conclusion was that education and communication are central to effective climate adaptation. Next one, please. And finally, let's take a look at some of the insights. The Aragon pilot highlighted several key lessons. Diversity matters. Engagement must reflect the voices of all the social groups. Trust and dialogue are essentials for co-creation. Local context is critical as urban and rural communities prioritize super different issues. And finally, that the engagement must be continuous as adaptation requires long-term involvement. In summary, successful citizen engagement in climate adaptation requires combining institutional support with lived experience to create socially grounded, locally appropriate and strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues from Spain. Now we are moving from the Spanish pilot to the Italian. Dear colleagues from Italy, from Rome.
Thank you so much. So we saw in the case of the Spanish pilot, there were several things that are going to be replicated in the other pilots as well, in terms of those citizens and the engagement of those citizens being crucial to be able to co-design the strategies. The City of Rome really participated actively with us, and we were able to identify, firstly, which are the vulnerabilities associated and that are present in the case of this city. So, for example, the aging infrastructure, the cultural heritage, so how can climate change impact cultural heritage, also agriculture, and public health, as you can see them listed here. But what we did, next slide please, was in the inception workshop, engage with different target audiences so we could identify which are the vulnerabilities that they think should be prioritized, and also which are the barriers that we might be facing in order to be able to properly tackle them. So from those inception workshops that we did in all the 3 pilots in the case of Rome, it was significant to be able to see so many stakeholders getting together for the first time. So for the first time, the National Electricity Company was getting together with NGOs addressing gender violence. And so that was able to start and level the playing field so that everyone could understand better what are the needs that each other have. To complement that, we also did a focus groups, so next slide please, with people that are working in the City of Rome but might be from any other region of Italy or the world, and with multicultural communities. And of course here the results were quite positive in terms of understanding how each of these cohorts view climate change, the vulnerabilities, but also how perhaps from the area where they come from, in the case of the multicultural communities, the countries where they come from, they might see some of these challenges in a different way, or maybe where they come from, those challenges might have already been addressed. So for us, it was quite positive to mix the results from those cases. In the case, for example, of multicultural communities, they consider that mentorship programs and the co-creation through a bottom-up approach is crucial. And the same thing goes in terms of that practical approach for the workers. But when we moved on to other type of cohorts, and in this case, the target audience of the youth, they wanted climate education to be integrated. Okay, so that case is a little bit different. And so the city could start seeing, depending on the type of stakeholder, how they want it to be integrated and what type of tools should be included. In the case of the Italian pilot, just like it happened with the Spanish pilot, we gained attention from other stakeholders that were not a priority initially, but of course we wanted to give the floor and be able to engage them as well. So we had these additional focus group activities, particularly with mental health operators, and they were able to identify that here also mentorship programs were important, but we understood that in order to be able to carry them out, they needed broader accessibility and activity tracking, and of course, to understand that climate change has a direct impact on mental health, which is something that was also important in the co-design of the adaptation plans for the city and in other regions. And then, of course, those results were integrated into the co-design of the Piano Clima, which is the adaptation plan that the city of Rome has right now. It was approved last year. I'm sorry, it was presented last year and approved this year, 2025. And it includes digital solutions, a core part on education and collaboration. And of course, the mentorship that was mentioned in several of the workshops was also integrated. We can see here a little bit of the result for the Italian pilot. And afterwards, one of my colleagues is going to mention what are the common points between all of these elements. We're going to move on to the Swedish pilot right now. This one was carried out in a really smaller city compared to the ones that we have just presented in the case of Italy and Spain. The Swedish pilot was in the city of Handbook, which is in the northern part. And in this case, they also have been seeing intense heat waves that affect the citizens, and particularly the elderly population is the one that sees the greatest impact. So it was important to also conduct the inception workshops involving all these groups of citizens to have the representation. And if we go to the next slide, you can see here some of the images that we have that. In that case, just like in the case of Italy, we use the mapping with barriers and vulnerabilities. In the case of Malmo, they chose to have a map of the city and some of the elements that could be identified there. They also saw some co-exploring activities and co-defining what are those key concepts through that brainstorming, and people were very engaged, which led us to be able to carry out some amazing focus groups afterwards, including, 2 sets of workshops with the workers. If we can go to the next slide, please, we will see some of the results from those focus groups. The idea was that we could also add some aspects that would be ideal to allow people to share their experiences and how they feel about climate change and how they've been impacted by this. So in this case, they introduced this feature, so allowing that participatory drawing exercise. And with all that, we created the final appropriation workshop to be able to single out which are the elements that would benefit the creation of these adaptation plans. So here, the methodology was the World Cafe, which was used in most of our workshops, all around the different pilots. And here, the key was, identifying the target group. Well, perhaps in other pilots, this was already set. Here, that experience allowed to identify those key stakeholders and also address the responsibility and accountability which need to be, of course, identified before that adaptation plan can be created. So then we know who will be taking the lead and the responsibility for that. We can go to the next slide. These results were actually embedded and integrated into that policy design, and it contributed to the upcoming urban heat strategy that the city is designing. Then we're going to close off with the information from our German pilot. As I mentioned earlier, we had 4 pilots, the Spanish one in Zaragoza, the Italian one in Rome, the Swedish one in Malmö. And in the case of the German one, there was also a different type of city so that we could address how these methodologies can be valid in different environments. So in this case, the city chosen was Preston. This is a city that is also impacted by heat waves. This is a common element that we are addressing in a lot of countries, and particularly in Europe. And it's a city that is characterized by social and economic vulnerability. So for us, it was also important to see that represented in the stakeholders that we have included. And apart from that, in 2002 and 2013, the Elbe River, which is where the city is located, provoked these severe flooding with one of these disasters that, of course, we are addressing with climate change. And so people were a little bit more sensitive to these topics and wanting to see how they could better prepare in case this happened again. So we can go to the next slide. We'll share a little bit of the summary. We did, again, inception workshops. This is the methodology in all the pilots. The inception workshop, where they could investigate these vulnerabilities and, of course, identify which are the adaptation gaps and the pitfalls. So different social groups, while perhaps before it might be a little bit identifiable, who are the stakeholders that might be at greater risk, it was important that the citizens themselves could be able to identify this. And so here, The ongoing activities and challenges were also linked to some of the activities that local climate adaptation networks carry out. So we have these alliances with local networks. Now, during this framework, we were able to also, of course, identify, how do people perceive climate adaptation versus how do they perceive mitigation? Do they understand the difference between these two? And of course, we did the focus group activity, like in the other pilots. You can go to the next slide, please. Here, the idea was how could citizens identify the solutions that they would propose, right? So again, we're trying to allow them to provide their ideas and to share what they believe could be done. And then through that co-evaluation process with the World Cafes and the methodologies that we were mentioning earlier, we identified and signal out in that final co-creation workshop which of those ideas could be implemented. In the case of Germany, their methodologies for co-creation were considered to be ideal, particularly the liberty workers and sociocracy movements, because they believe that they can accurately include diversity, equity, and inclusion into the mix for the creation of those adaptation plans. So this is a little bit of the summary from our core pilots, and now we're looking forward to our colleagues from either cities, which will share which were the final conclusions that we got from all these pilots.
Thanks a lot. I hope that you are hearing me well. So the result from the pilot activities, there are three main goals. It was identifying barriers and vulnerabilities, understanding concerns and unique perspective, and proposals and contribution to adaptation solutions. In the four pilots, there were the main phases of the participatory process. The first one was inception workshop with 8 target audience involved and the decision makers from the local regional authorities. The focus group, it was the main 3 groups were workers, youth, multi-ethnic communities, and other vulnerable groups that already my colleague explained. And the final co-creation workshop with the 8 target audience that we have in the inception workshop of every pilot, the participants from the focus group, and the decision makers from the local regional authorities in each pilot. And the last phases of the participatory project is the integration into policy. So the third one is new adaptation plans and strategy and updating existing ones. Next slide. The key takeaways from the co-creation, we could resume in 4. The first one is how to communicate climate adaptation in a positive and inclusive way. Focus on increasing water intake during hot conditions. The participatory city design, the digital apps, and the counter mapping for more resilient cities. Focus on enhancing water availability in the city, but can include other topics, the existing data and existing apps that we have. Sorry, the other one? The last slide, please. Yeah, thank you. And the awareness campaign in the school, mutual learning and connections, climate adapted schools, of course, and funding climate adaptation, how to make it more effective. Climate adaptation must be considered in all decisions across city offices. Next slide, please. So the pilot recommendations, we could resume in importance of being flexible when implementing methodologies to learn more about each context, establish a strong partnership with citizen engagement initiative that already exist in the local and regional places, ensure that is a continuity of the process of citizens' involvement and flexibility, maintain the methods and type of citizen engagement tools, integrating monitoring and evaluation techniques early on, ensures that citizens can engage with as little effort as possible, and ensure that the participation is clear with accurate information to support as more scientific way possible, and of course promote inclusive and diverse participation, including diverse voices, including opposing ones, because it's important to have the both sides of the of the arguments, and of course, offer concrete benefits and incentives for local communities to actively engage in climate adaptations, and improve institutional coordination as a streamline governance and avoid overlapping competencies to ensure effective decision making and reduce delays in implementing adaptation strategies. Thank you. Next slide. I give to Maria again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucia. So as we saw with the different pilots, we were able to identify some of the needs. And so one of the core parts of our project also included the creation of those capacity building activities that could support internationally the development of these awareness methodologies, but not also that. Also, we wanted to focus on how people could have that empowerment. And so through these inception workshops, through co-creation workshops, those webinars and the cross-regional peer-to-peer workshops, we were able to identify different areas. One of them, for example, was misinformation and disinformation. That was something that everybody understood we needed to fight. And so from those activities that we did, and several were online, others were on site, we created a repository of those capacity building activities. We created specific presentations, short videos, and also information sheets that were translated into multiple languages that you can find online for free. And perhaps that is another way to contribute to how you can see the information. And perhaps if you need that exact item, you can directly incorporate and integrate it into those citizen empowerment activities and methodologies. The idea was to create tools that could be used by everyone.
And now I would like to give the floor to American Director from Brussels, who will be speaking about policy recommendations. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So one of the culminating outputs of the Adaptation AGORA project is the roadmap to transformative change. So in our project, we could identify that though high-level policies for citizen engagement exist, but their on-the-ground implementation frequently remains fragmented, voluntary, and it also often fails to empower the most vulnerable groups of stakeholders. And with that, we could identify a critical gap between the ambition of policymakers and the reality on the ground. So our objective was to bridge this gap by developing a strategic and evidence-based policy roadmap based on scientific evidence, expert and practitioners' knowledge, European policies and policymaker inputs. Yeah, next slide, please. So to develop the roadmap, we have first conducted a deep dive into the current state of citizen engagement by both analyzing the literature, but also the climate policies out there. So we have reviewed more than 120 research papers involving 70 also practitioners through surveys and also bilateral interviews. And we have also evaluated more than 30 European climate policies, both at the EU level and also at the regional level. We have also looked beyond the climate adaptation field. So we have also looked at policies from other areas. We have analyzed, for example, digitalization policies to identify instruments for participation which are effectively used in this domain, and also to assess their transferability to climate change adaptation. And we were also able to map the knowledge through surveys and interviews with managers of digital platforms to find best practices for collaboration and knowledge sharing. And third, we have been able, so using all this evidence, so we have been able to develop a strategic roadmap with 4 main pillars and 16 concrete recommendations. We also had more than 60 policymakers, researchers, and practitioners at various European forums, which helped us to validate and refine the roadmap. Next slide, please. So what are the key challenges to scale engagement that we could identify? And they can be divided into two categories. So first, we have cross-cutting challenges which are faced by practitioners. For example, they include engagement of vulnerable and marginalized groups, also financing and management complexities, or lack of transparency and evaluation of engagement processes. So whether we actually know how the inputs are being treated following the participation. And then we also have contextual disparities across Europe. So we have engagement culture, which varies by countries and regions. We have various perceptions of climate risk and vulnerabilities. We have also a fragmented policy and regulatory support, which also all have to be taken into account. Next slide, please. And so this is the evidence-based roadmap that we have developed following all of the studies and elaborations with various groups of stakeholders. So we have 4 pillars. So pillar 1, from optional to essential. Oh, sorry, previous slide, please. So we have pillar 1 again, from optional to essential, embedding meaningful engagement in different laws and regulations to create clear mandate and accountability. We have pillar 2, from ambition to ability, equipping local authorities with funding, skills, and internal structures which they need to sustain engagement. Then we have pillar 3, from passive to active. We have to ensure that all voices are heard, especially the vulnerable people, by enhancing their climate literacy and removing barriers to participate. And we have pillar 4, from isolated to interconnected, which involves building a learning ecosystem where we connect knowledge platforms and foster peer-to-peer exchanges to ensure that we have a transparent feedback and evaluation system. Next slide, please. So we would like, based on the roadmap that we have created in the Adaptation Agora, so we need collective action at all levels, and we will also like to pledge participants of the COP30 conference. So, and we have here various major stakeholder groups, so policymakers, and we suggest adopting the roadmap and integrating the 4 strategic pillars that we have identified into national and also regional, sub-regional adaptation strategies, as well as mandating meaningful engagement and creating supportive frameworks. For practitioners and civil society, we would like to suggest using the framework to advocate for the resources they need and to be able to design just, inclusive, and transparent adaptation projects, which also empower local communities and citizens and vulnerable groups. For funders and innovators, we suggest shifting from short-term projects to long-term perspectives, supporting capacity building, interoperable knowledge platforms, and also institutional reforms so that they can make their engagement efforts sustainable. For the climate community, we suggest joining the network and collaborating through knowledge exchange to share and exchange experiences, best practices, with the major goal of building a lasting community of practice for citizen-led adaptation.
Thank you very much, Nikki. I would like to invite Rosie to speak about another interesting piece of our research about digital tools. Rosie, please, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Yes, so I'm going to introduce you to one of the digital tools of the Adaptation Agora project, and that is the Agora Community Hub. This is an online meeting place that aims to empower local communities to share their needs, their knowledge, and their experiences on climate adaptation issues and solutions. The Agora Community Hub is a resource hub of information which can be translated via Google Translate, so that the information is available in multiple different languages. It was a platform that's been co-designed with different citizens and stakeholders over the last couple of years, and is a platform that is used for networking, different communications, engaging with different peers, as well as a space for sharing knowledge and holding discussions. So next slide, please. One of the key features of the Agora Community Hub is the Agora Explorer. This is an interactive map that showcases innovative projects and case studies with a focus on Europe. And the map also showcases different organizations and users of the website who have created profiles and approved that their profile can be shared on the map as well, to encourage different communications and collaboration between organizations and people working on a similar topic area. So one of the key features of this, as I mentioned, is the networking and engagement spaces that are on the website. These offer the ability to filter and search information by topics or theme, as well as engage in discussions, so asking questions to other users and your peers, or answering questions that others might be asking. We currently have a few different topic areas and different forum areas set up. These are focusing on the Agora community networks, general kind of citizen engagement with adaptation and resilience. We have one on heat resilience and health, one on cities, one on climate adaptation platforms, and one on youth intergenerational justice and education. But then I will pass back to Marina, I believe, for the information on the remaining digital tools.
Thank you very much, Rosie. As she was mentioning, we created that first digital tool so that we could be able to map out all the different projects and allow people to connect with one another. The idea is that if you have a project or you want to engage with people that have already been down that road, or that maybe even have a sister project, you can go to that initial Explorer and find out more about them. But what also came as a result from our workshops and also capacity building activities was that a lot of citizens don't know how to treat climate data themselves, and that other aspects we were mentioning before on disinformation. So we created 2 academies. Here you will have some QR codes that you can scan if you want to go directly to those academies. The first one, Digital Academy Against Climate Change Disinformation, allows us to identify which are the false narratives, how to identify and signal out fake news, and also how to learn more about the creation of tools that can be aligned with fighting disinformation and misinformation. At the moment, the information here is mostly in English, but we have received feedback from different stakeholders. If we can go to the next slide, they commented that they were very interested in knowing that fact check aspect. So how can we really identify the aspects that allow us to determine if news is true or not? And how can we confirm, right, the veracity of some of the claims? Then in our digital platform, that Climate Change Disinformation Academy, we will also find biannual reports on the state of climate change disinformation, so you know what are we fighting against at the moment. And then also more relevant resources and how you can identify the reliable information sources. For a lot of our stakeholders, this was really valuable because they could have all of that in a single platform, whereas before maybe it was scattered out through different online tools. In parallel, if we go to the next slide, I will tell you a little bit more about the Digital Academy to access and use climate data and how to monitor climate risks. A lot of our stakeholders realize that empowering citizens to be able to check information for themselves would really give them the additional value that they need to trust and to believe in climate change. But not only that, to be able to do their own calculations, right? So Here we created 10 different modules to walk people through the different types of climate-related data and how risks could be monitored. So if you access that platform, you will see, and let's go to the next slide, there are 3 main areas. The training modules that I was referring to before will cover the topics related to climate change, tools, risk assessment, and governance. That's some of the most important ones. But then we also have the inventories on existing hubs and platforms that deal with climate data, climate risks, and climate adaptation in general. So that's, again, one way to access all of that information in a single portal. And last but not least, we have this additional tool where citizen science is promoted and where scientists can interact with average citizens so that you can understand how to improve that collaboration, but also the existence of local climate data and how that can be used and harnessed. Because as we know, a lot of the aspects that relate to climate adaptation and the plans that we need to design are based on that local impact. So it's very important to have those links. But we realized that it would not be complete without making things a little bit more fun. So we decided to create also this mobile app. And this is based on a quiz that you can play by yourself or you can play against other people, even in teams. We have tested this with various groups, even with the private sector. They actually hosted a session with one of the sponsors here, one of the multinational companies, and they thought it would be a really good idea to incorporate it as part of their training session. So it allows you to test your own knowledge on climate change in general, but then also to see, right, how you can recognize that sustainable behavioral models, right? And at the same time, counter disinformation. You have a really large pool of questions, so if you want to download it and try it yourself, I encourage you to do that. It would be really fun. And then you can, let's go to the next slide. You can actually, as I was mentioning before, play in a classic mode, so you're playing against your own self, testing your own knowledge. You could potentially have what's called a time trial model, so you're playing against the clock, right? Trying to answer as many questions as possible in a short amount of time. And then we have different category modes where you can see different topics. So we go from climate change fundamentals, and perhaps you are an experienced person and you're quite knowledgeable on that. So perhaps you can test yourself with media literacy, something that maybe you are unfamiliar with, or you want to know what are the latest fake news that are out there, right? So this is also something that we tested with the different stakeholders in the pilots, but also in some of the capacity building activities. And it was one of the first times that we had done that with different stakeholder groups. It could be the case that in the future we test this with other cohorts or more broadly. And we have, for example, interest from different stakeholder communities that have been following our project. For example, the city of Almeida in Portugal. They were very interested in this because they want to see if they can replicate this kind of app in Portuguese, obviously, so that they can engage and empower their citizens. And, you know, last but not least, you should know that we have at the moment for the app that we developed for the project, more or less 500 questions. We have credible references for each of the answers so that we know where this information is coming from. It's not just the project tells you this. We are referencing all the different sources to give even more credibility. And the last digital tool that we created, if we go to the next slide, here we go. We created a digital handbook that shares all of the experiences, but we do it through this storytelling where we give voice to the different stakeholder groups. If you access this website, Voices of Climate Adaptation, you will find out that you can see more or less the experiences in different pilot regions and all the activities that we have been carrying out. Our project is finishing in December, so it's been 3 full years working with all of these cohorts. And it's nice because it's not just us or our colleagues online sharing. You can also hear the voice of the participants in the focus groups, of the different decision makers, from our own cities that were in the pilot, but also from other cities that decided to join some of our activities. If we go to the next slide, here's a little bit of a summary. And the last thing that we wanted to share with you was that we created this glossary because we realized that not always we have the same definition and the same concept. And perhaps depending on the background where you're coming from, you may understand one thing or another for some of these key concepts. So we wanted to have a homogeneous approach. That's why we also created that glossary that is replicated in the Agora Community Hub that our colleague Rosie was explaining earlier. So you will see that these elements are going to help create that same baseline of understanding between all the citizen groups that are involved in the co-design and co-creation of these adaptation plans. We realized that a lot of the tools that we were able to generate and the methodologies should be integrated right into this evaluation framework. So what is the relevant knowledge that needs to be included here? How can we ensure that just participation, and how can we ensure the mutual learning perspective? It's not just decision makers creating the adaptation plan, but it's also engaging all the citizens so that they can be an active participant in this work. And so last but not least, we were able to generate this mapless evaluation framework to understand which citizen engagement methodologies could be best for each of the frameworks where we might be wanting to implement them. So apart from these elements that were derived from our project initially, from the different activities that we did, we also wanted to share that knowledge. So we had several webinars. You can actually find them online, the recordings, if you want to access them, where we also wanted to interact with other actors in society, other projects, and even other organizations to understand how do they view these results and how are they tackling the same problems. So among the different collaborations, we can move to the next slide, please. Among the different collaborations that we had were some of the other climate, Horizon Europe climate adaptation projects like CleanUs or CleanX. Then we had Maya, Science Us. It is a really interesting project that is going to finance different citizen engagement initiatives. And then, for example, we also participated and collaborated with the Organization of the American States that directly have to deal with these adaptation plans and co-design and involving stakeholders. We have two webinars that were co-hosted with the European Union Mission for Adaptation to Climate Change, which you can also quite interested to see not only our results, but also results from other projects. And then last but not least, we wanted to let you know where you can find all the results and information from our project. There is a platform that is called Zenodo. You can see there how it is spelled. If you type in Zenodo Adaptation AGORA, you will find the results from our project, even this presentation, and also some protocols if you want to engage citizens in your region with those focus group activities. We created standardized protocols that you can replicate in your area. And the same thing goes for the interviews and surveys that we did for that policy analysis. We wanted the results from our experience to be shared with everyone so that they can be replicated in different environments. We would love to hear, obviously, from the feedback that we're getting constantly from our stakeholders, but also from other latitudes. How do these elements resonate with you? How could they be applicable in other areas of the world? And how can we better adapt them? But for now, the pilot experiences were quite successful. We even expanded beyond those regions. We had interest from multiple areas in Europe and abroad. We even created what's called a pool of Adaptation AGORA followers, some different regions and decision makers that wanted to know how we were moving forward and progressing with the inception workshops and different activities so that they could replicate them. And so this is our kind of like final closing project conference where we are sharing all of these results. We're super happy to be able to do this here at COP, because it's a way to also expand beyond the European realm. And I think that is more or less it from our side. Maddie, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yes, we still have a couple of minutes of questions, and of course our big thank you to Miro from Rothschild who helped us in organization and our really valuable partner. Miro, please, if you would like to ask us about the result of our digital project, we still have a bit of time.
Thank you for the great presentation. For the great work. Many questions. Okay, many of them I will have to leave for later on. I represent the UNESCO Center for AI from So for research and AI, and we do have quite some, let's say, intersecting work, particularly on fake news, and this is something that would be interesting to explore further on moving towards let's say the fake news in the sustainability narrative, which I think it's been getting quite some nice momentum and having AI working for us in that part. You mentioned about interaction with other initiatives. So how can we move this forward? Now that you're closing, what's next? How can we work together? And how others can participate in it?
Here, is that good? Okay. Thank you so much. And for us, it would be great because one of the things that we would want, the digital platforms that we created don't die with the project. They continue to live. For example, the Community Hub is hosted on WeAdapt, and the Digital Academies are going to be hosted on Data, which is one of the tools that the Mediterranean Center for Climate Change has created. So we would love to see how we can create perhaps a new project to further develop some of these tools. Since initially they were quite welcomed by the community, we can see how we can better expand. One of the things that we received as feedback was being able to adapt it into all the local languages. The Community Hub is something that we can do automatically with AI, the automatic translation. But for instance, with the fake news, it would be ideal to be able to develop the tools in each of the languages, curated by experts in misinformation and disinformation of those languages. It's definitely not something that, as you know, we can just translate automatically, because a lot of the things are, nuances from the word that it might mean this or that. But yeah, we can definitely talk to see how we can continue expanding the outreach.
And I would like to invite you also at 3:00 today at Finnish Pavilion. We have another talk, and it will be specifically focused on misinformation and disinformation in disaster risk reduction. But we will be happy to send you our papers and what we do.
I don't know if there are perhaps any other questions that we can take. Oh, first one. Do you mind coming closer? Thank you so much.
I think you addressed my first question, which was about how you're going to pursue and maintain the project after the EU funding runs out, because I know that's a common problem with EU projects. So my specific question is about the deep dive into citizen engagement that you carried out. Your colleague said that you have looked at policies and scientific papers. That would give you theoretical insight, but would you also look at practical examples of citizen engagement, such as citizen assemblies and other practical pieces?
Thank you very much. It's a really good question. As a matter of fact, we have a sister project that deals exactly with the assemblies in the European Union. That's why we did not go so deeper into those aspects. But for instance, in Spain, which probably was one of the areas we were analyzing through Zaragoza, what happened was that during the course of our project last year, we had a severe drought, and one of the regions had to implement the drought adaptation plan. So while that was happening, we actually carried out a survey with citizens to know which would be the best methodologies if they would want to be engaged at that moment. And for example, assemblies were not perhaps one of the ones that they mentioned at the top, but it was true that if they are called for action, so if they are somehow summoned to participate in any kind of form while the climate disaster risk is happening or while we are implementing those plans, 3 or 4 of the different methodologies would work. But what matters the most in that particular case, the result that we had was that the engagement would be much higher if people are living through that situation. So while we didn't go deeper into some of those aspects because other projects were dealing with that and we were working concurrently, as a matter of fact, we have one webinar that talks about the climate assemblies and the results that they saw. We did want to know how the factors that are perhaps of that climate risk materializing would affect and would impact the methodologies that we could use. And that particular aspect is really important also in improving the trust that people would have in the government's decision making. So we mapped out the different methodologies. We asked them, to single out which one they would prefer, and they marked 3 or 4. But what was the determinant factor, and that came from some of the focus groups and additional activities that we did, was that if they were living through a drought and they couldn't use the shower on the beach, then they would be more willing to participate in anything rather than, oh, nothing, quote unquote, nothing is happening, and let's just plan for something that may or may not be in our future. And that was really important for us because we didn't perhaps initially think how relevant it would be the exposure to that situation in terms of promoting or changing the likelihood of people participating in any of those engagement methodologies. I think there might be last question.
Yes, just curious how closely integrated your work is with the declaration coming out of Top 30, the Declaration on Information Integrity on Climate Change. How closely related is that to your work?
We are very much aligned, but we have not actively participated in that. Some of the members of our teams have been participating in global misinformation and disinformation conferences from where a lot of the things that are then discussed here were derived, but our work is not at the moment directly related to it. I think we can close. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone who's online and everyone who's here.